We're going to take you on a unique road trip that follows the infamous San Andreas Fault from the Cajon Pass to the small hamlet of Valermo for a total distance of about 30 miles. The route we'll follow will be less than a half mile from the fault the entire way, and often we'll be right on top of it. We'll make stops and point out features marking the fault. Unlike other geologic features, such as volcanoes which are easy to spot, features along the San Andreas are not very obvious or noticeable. Watching this tour will help you see what some of those features look like and where to find them. The San Andreas isn't quite the same as other faults that you hear about. It is actually a plate boundary where the Pacific Plate and the North American Plate meet. They are actually passing by each other, causing a grinding action that has gone on for millions of years. This grinding action is what causes earthquakes and has created the features you are going to see on our tour. These tectonic plates, as they're called, are big chunks of the Earth's surface that literally float around, moving in different directions, while we sit on top of them and enjoy the ride. Although the San Andreas is a plate boundary, it behaves a lot like other faults, but on a much larger scale. The San Andreas is a very significant plate boundary. This world map will show a scope of its significance. As you can see, the next plate boundary to the east of the San Andreas is in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, where the North American Plate meets the Eurasian and African plates. The next plate boundary to the west is on the other side of the Pacific Ocean. Now that you have an idea of how big and significant the San Andreas Fault really is, hopefully I'm not going to deflate your enthusiasm about the fault by saying, you're not going to see many things that stand out along our tour. However, flying over the fault in an airplane or watching the 3D Google Earth imagery I use in the tour, you'll definitely see the trace of the San Andreas. So buckle up in whatever you're sitting in and prepare to be introduced to this famous, or rather infamous, sleeping giant that can create a huge natural disaster in less than a minute. Our tour starts about 50 miles east of Los Angeles. Here is where the fault is located. And here are the two mountain ranges where noticeable movement occurred. This is the direction the land on each side of the fault is moving. Millions of years ago, this landmass used to be here, but counting down to today, it is situated where we all know it to be now. Between this split in the two mountains is where the Cajon Pass is located and is the beginning of our trip along the mighty San Andreas. Now, we are going to zoom in to where we'll start our trip. Notice the fault here? With aerial imagery, you can follow the fault from the Salton Sea, past the Cajon Pass, and all the way to San Francisco. Get to the beginning of our tour by taking Interstate 15 to the Cajon Pass, and take either Cleghorn Road or Kenwood Avenue exits. This will put you on Old Route 66. From Cleghorn, drive Route 66 for 1.7 miles. From Kenwood, drive Route 66 for 4.5 miles. Look for the road named Swarthout Canyon Road. Here's where our journey begins. This is what the intersection of Route 66 and Swarthout Canyon Road looks like. Remember to reset your odometer to 0 here. Our first feature to look at is a sag pond at 0.6 of a mile. I'll explain what a sag pond is in a moment. This pond is on private property and is smack on top of the San Andreas. Throughout the tour, I'll show you the fault zone for reference. Just beyond here, you can see where the San Andreas caused some unique erosion on the hillside next to Route 66. This is known as Blue Cut. It got its name when early Route 66 travelers noticed the bluish tint in the soil. You'll see more dramatic erosion like this later. After crossing the second railroad crossing, you'll reach Lost Lake in 1.3 miles. The pavement ends after the second railroad crossing, but don't let that scare you because, as you can see, it is an easy dirt road. There is a big parking area here. There are even restrooms. Park your vehicle and walk past the restrooms over the small hill and you'll see the lake. Lost Lake is like a little oasis. It's popular with the bird watchers. It may be known by the locals as a great swimming hole, but it is a sag pond. You'll notice that Lost Lake is oriented in the same direction as Lone Pine Canyon, the long skinny valley you'll soon be driving up. So what is a sag pond? They are formed when underground spring water is blocked by impermeable soils, such as clay, created by the fault's grinding action and then is forced up to the surface at a low spot along the blockage, creating a pond. In this trip, we're going to see several sag ponds. Here is a diagram of how a sag pond is created in a fault zone. This is the fault here, and here is where water comes down from above and is diverted by the fault to where the pond is. Here's the fault zone again. All right, let's move on. At about 2 miles, the road dips down a ridge. The small ridge on the left is most likely a fault scarp that was created during the huge 1857 Fort Tejon earthquake. A scarp is created in the few seconds during an earthquake and is a surface rupture that looks like a small step up or an offset in the land. It is where earth is pushed up or moved sideways during the quake's movement. A scarp can be 5 to 15 feet high and just as long. Most of the scarps along this trip are, unfortunately, hidden by vegetation. Continue driving up the dirt road until you reach the stop sign at Lone Pine Canyon Road. Looking back, you can see Interstate 15 and where we first saw the fault. Looking forward, we still have a ways to go up Lone Pine Canyon. In this area, you may see large concentrations of stalks that might even be blooming with white flowers. These desert plants are generically called chaparral yucca. Turn left onto the pavement, and continue driving up Lone Pine Canyon for a few miles. There are not too many fault features to see along this part of the trip, other than scarps on the left side of the valley. However, notice how long and narrow Lone Pine Canyon really is. This is the result of fault movement and is known as a linear valley. There are many examples of this fault feature all along the fault's trace across California. Our next stop, which is now 8.1 miles from Route 66, is Clyde Ranch. This stop has nothing to do with the San Andreas Fault, but while we're here, let me give you a little bit of history about it. This ranch, built in the 1870s, was built by the Clyde family. It's still owned by the same family today. And even more historically intriguing is that the Clydes were good friends with the Earp brothers, especially Virgil and Wyatt. When Wyatt lived in San Bernardino, he would ride up here on horseback, following the same path you just drove, to visit his friends, the Clydes. Continuing on, our next stop is at about 10.7 miles. Here, providing it is a clear day, and if you can find a safe place to park, walk back along this guardrail to see a good view of the fault trace all the way to almost Palm Springs, about 70 miles in the distance. Here, you can see where the fault crosses through the San Bernardino Mountains from the Palm Springs area and passes south of San Gorgonio Mountain. It then runs fairly straight and actually created the southern edge of the San Bernardino mountain range. The fault passes under our feet here and heads into the town of Wrightwood. Here is a map showing the same line that extends southeast along the fault path for about 70 miles. Continuing into Wrightwood, here you can see how the fault zone cuts right through the southern portion of town. Here is our next stop, which is another sag pond. Follow our directions on the animated map you're watching now, which involves several turns to the next stop. You might want to consult a map or your GPS. Like many sag ponds on private property, this one was capitalized on and is part of the Wrightwood Country Club. The sag pond is their 1.5-acre swimming lake. Drive around the lake to Cedar Street to see another common characteristic of the fault. When you drive onto Cedar Street, this depression will be very obvious. In the trough of the depression, you'll notice these water wells, which takes out water trapped by the fault and feeds the local water supply. When you're ready to move on, drive down the hill on Cedar to Highway 2. You'll pass by the Wrightwood Museum. 1 block to the left is Park Drive, which is Wrightwood's main drag. Here and on other streets are several shops and dining choices if you'd like to take a break and catch a bite to eat. Jensen's on Highway 2 is a unique market to check out and grab supplies for a picnic to eat later on this tour. From Wrightwood, head uphill or west on Highway 2. You may not notice, but you'll be driving up a narrow valley very similar to Lone Pine Canyon. On the left, for the next few miles, there used to be other small sag ponds, but they have all dried up from increased water consumption. Soon, you'll pass by the Mountain High East ski area. In 3/4 of a mile after that, you'll reach a small visitor center on the right. Pull over here and find a place to park. This point marks a significant point along the San Andreas Fault. It is the highest elevation on the fault. Behind the visitor center, you can get a close-up view of a scarp that was most likely created during that huge 1857 earthquake. Just beyond the visitor center is a stone monument that looks like a small castle. This marks the highest point on the fault. It also marks the spot of what was to be the site of the 1932 Winter Olympics. Unfortunately, not enough snow fell that year and the event was moved to Lake Placid, New York. Here's a picture from 1926 of what was then called Davidson Arch. Driving past the remains of Davidson Arch leads you into a confusing 5-point intersection. Make sure to reset your odometer to 0 here. Take the second right, where signs point to Jackson Lake, which is Big Pines Highway and signed County N4. Our next stop is just 0.6 miles past the intersection. Here we will find a large concentration of what is known as fault gouge. Here, you'll see light-colored dirt that has undergone some very severe erosion. Remember at the beginning of our trip, there was a feature called Blue Cut? The erosional feature you saw there is the same feature you see here. Fault gouge, sometimes known as fault flour, is rock and dirt that has been pulverized into a fine powder from the grinding action of the fault. At this spot and others along the fault, such as Blue Cut, the two plates passing by each other created this fault gouge. It is very unstable and is easily eroded by water runoff. Just down the road at 0.8 miles is a safe place to park on the right, plus it has good examples of fault gouge on both sides of the road. Also on the left side of the road, you can peer down into a gorge with heavily eroded fault gouge all around. This gorge is entirely in the fault zone. If you look around, you'll see some pretty dramatic erosion, with trees clinging on for a foothold. Continue on down the road. Along the way, you'll pass through a few hairpin turns. At 2 miles, you'll come across Apple Tree Campground on the left side of the road. Park here if you'd like to take a small hike and get another view of that gorge you saw previously. You can either hike or drive up this dirt road, go past this water tank to the road's end. Climb over this scarp and be very careful not to walk any closer and fall in. Here you'll see a closer view into that gorge. Look around closely at all the erosion and again how trees are clinging on for dear life. A short distance past Apple Tree Campground, you'll reach Jackson Lake at 2.8 miles. Yep, you guessed it, this is another sag pond. Similar to Lost Lake, this sag pond is long and skinny and oriented and pointing out the direction of the fault, paralleling the road. Jackson Lake is popular with anglers and nature seekers alike. Unfortunately, in wintertime, it has been the place of tragedy for some people who were clueless about the dangers of walking on frozen lakes. Several people have died over the years playing on the not-so-thick ice of Jackson Lake. While enjoying the curves in the road, at about 6.2 miles, you'll see this barn on the right. Although you wouldn't notice the fault zone from the road, the trough that the barn is sitting in is evidence of the fault. At 7 miles, our next point of interest is yet another sag pond. This is Caldwell Lake, and again it is long and skinny and oriented in the direction of the fault. This sag pond also is on private property, so enjoy the view from the road. At 10 miles, the road makes a U-turn to descend back into the fault zone. From the U-turn, it's a great view of the fault zone as it passes through Valermo. On a clear day, and with a keen eye, you can see the trace of the San Andreas through Palmdale and beyond for more than 50 miles. Are now approaching Valermo, where there are a few more sag ponds, but not visible from the road. At 11.4 miles, we can see here where the fault crosses the road and passes over a ridge. You'll see these water wells on the left, just past Big Rock Creek Road, which again marks exactly where the fault sits. Just over this ridge is a sag pond. Just to the south from here, you'll see these rock outcroppings known as Devil's Punch Bowl. These rocks are similar to the Mormon rocks in the Cajon Pass. At one time, both rock groups were joined together, but millions of years of fault movement have separated them far from each other. Now, we'll actually pass by the small hamlet of Valermo, where you might spot some fault scarps behind the ranches on the left. Then, at 14.2 miles, turn left on Fort Tejon Road, and then a quick left onto Pallet Creek Road. Our final stop is at 15.5 miles. This is the spot where geologists have dug trenches to study historical movements on the fault. Here is where the fault zone is located in relation to the study area, and here is how you walk there from the road. Park on the wide turnout on the left side of the road and watch out for oncoming traffic. Here is a view of where we came from in Big Pines, and here is a sweeping view of where the study area is located. This is what the study area looks like. When we last visited the site, there were strings laid out to form a study grid. What is obvious are the peat moss layers marking historical periods in time from the past few thousand years. There is one obvious offset in the layers that marks a major earthquake event on the San Andreas. At this point, you can truly say you are standing on top of the fault line where both the North American and Pacific plates have been sliding past each other for millions of years. Although the sliding action isn't very obvious, Right here before you, geologists have been able to determine approximately how far the plates have slid and at what time intervals. We hope you have enjoyed our virtual tour of this section of the infamous San Andreas Fault. Zooming out now, you will see again the area that we covered, starting in the Cajon Pass. In future articles or posts to our travel blog, we will cover other interesting sections along the San Andreas. So stay tuned or subscribe for updates to our blog and/or YouTube channel.